you know,
Okay.
I'm David Klein. I'm the interim city manager. I'm the budget officer for the duration that I'm here. Just, I know introductions is the first item up. Brian, does everybody know you?
Brian Lorimer, I'm the Public Works Director for the city.
Stacy Keating, citizen member of the Budget Committee.
Andrew Keating, City Councilor, second year on the Budget Committee.
Judy, you're here as staff as well, right?
Yes, Judy Richter, interim finance director.
And then,
That's right.
go ahead, Lisa.
Lisa Figueroa, city recorder.
And then Barry Brewster, and I think this is my third or fourth year on the budget committee.
Okay, and this is four, there's four participants, so the other two are just sitting and watching. Okay.
And one is me. I'm in here twice.
Okay, I'm gonna kick you off. So if you could share the
Yeah.
thing. In the meantime, just a little about me. I've been in the business for over 40 years. I've been in Oregon for 23 years. Done budgets for 9 cities in Oregon. I've been on, actually, I don't know if I've done budgets in each and every instance, but I've been involved in 9 cities, and most of those I've done budgets for. So and I started my life as a budget officer for the county in Colorado, large county in Colorado. I was budget analyst and then budget director for that county, third largest county in the state. So budget's mostly my background, with a lot of other things, but.
Arapahoe.
Hmm?
Oh, Arapahoe. I was just letting her know because
Arapahoe, okay.
Yeah.
You out of Colorado?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course you are. Duh. Yeah, Arapahoe County. I said Littleton was home for a while. Not physically, I didn't live there. I just felt like I lived there at times. Anyway,
Which one?
Littleton, Colorado.
Littleton.
Yeah. Notorious for Columbine.
Oh,
Is it moving forward?
Oh, it's my turn. So here we go. We're gonna start, everybody can see that wherever they are. Nothing's happening.
And it should be this way. And you probably want to hit play.
That's what I had it going.
Yeah, you did for a second there.
Better call Justin in.
We tested it before the meeting. That was
This is,
fine.
this is on. We have a baby here.
Yeah. It's fine.
There you go. Okay. I'm watching. Okay, so. So what is local budget law? It's the standards and procedures for preparing, presenting and using our budget. So the budget law is codified for the state of Oregon at 294, et cetera. And that is our Bible of how we prepare budgets in this state. It's a little different from state to state. Largely, it's very similar in the West, but this is the basis of ours. The point of the budget is, and what is local budget law, is it requires an opportunity for and encourages citizen involvement. So this is, it's about transparency. It's about transparency in establishing the financial plan for your local government. And that's what the law requires. It requires that we provide a method for estimating our expenses, our resources, and our proposed actions. And more about all of those as we go forward. And then finally, it provides an outline of the program and services provided by your local government. So that's what the law requires of us, and it's more than meets that minimum requirement. The budget you will ultimately get to see. This session, you won't be seeing the city's budget. We will be presenting that at our first regular meeting after we present the budget message. So that's our normal practice here, and that's normal practice that I've used over the years. So why do we have a budget? So it's a financial plan. Get my own down here. It's the financial plan for the city. It basically puts meaning to the words that we do. So it's a policy tool in which we set our goals and our policies and our priorities. It provides the resource to implement and translate those goals to action plans. To the extent that you have a goal for the year, vast majority of those goals require the expenditure of funds, and so the budget is a tool that allows you to do that. It allocates your resources. You have varying types of resources. We'll dive into some of those as we move along. It's a communication tool. The primary communication tool of, again, our financial plan for the city going forward. It's for decision makers in the administration, but it's also a communication tool to the public, our true audience. It's an accounting tool. It's used to provide and ensure financial integrity of the system, which is tested by means of the audit. That measures our performance, and it measures the integrity of the work that we have done over the course of the year. And so that is the typical value of a budget. So here's in short terms what the process looks like. This is sort of very summary level. The first step in the budget process per law for every local government is the budget officer prepares a proposed budget. So that's the budget officer's budget. That's the first one that'll come in. That's what you will see when you first sit down to consider the budget message and the budget that we prepare and start your work. Next up comes the budget committee approval of the budget, the property tax rate. So you'll go through the process. You'll have at least 1 or 2 meetings, maybe more, maybe probably no fewer than 2. At which time you'll have a budget, you'll have a public hearing. You will consider the budget that has been submitted by the budget officer. You can change that in any manner you see fit, and ultimately your work will be to approve the budget that is presented to you as you modify it. Your budget committee consists of 7 citizens and residents of the community, and 7 council members. That's by state law. That's how your budget committee is comprised. And so your mission at the end of the day, and you're only taking a final vote, and that vote will be to approve the budget and make a recommendation with respect to the property tax rate. We'll talk a little bit about that more as we go through this. Finally, as we go into the city council, who will see the work that you have done. They are at that point, their hands are a little bit tied. There's not a lot they can do to vary the budget that is presented to them and approved by the budget committee. You can all of you have all the freedom in the world to vary the budget that's presented by the budget officer, but the budget committee is held as a fairly high level in the process by the state and limiting what the council can do. So the council, I believe, has something like a 10% range of movement they can do in terms of varying the budget. Judy, weigh in if I mischaracterize that. So their job ultimately will be to adopt a budget, to appropriate the budget. Appropriating the budget means to set the legal limits of expenditures and set a property tax rate. That property tax rate, again, we'll coming back to this several times tonight. So let's take a little further dive into the budget committee responsibilities. You receive the budget message from the budget officer together with the proposed budget. You hear public questions and comments. You'll have a public hearing early in the process. That's with respect to at least a minimum state share revenues. You will review the budget and adjust it as you deem appropriate. You will make a recommendations for the amount of tax rate, tax or rate that should be the tax rate. Or tax or rate, depending on what you're dealing with. It's tax if you're dealing with debt service, it's the rate if you're dealing with everything else. And then finally, you will approve the budget. You'll do this in 2 capacities. Because the city has an urban renewal district, you will be sitting in two separate times, one just at the same meetings, but you'll be sitting as the budget committee advising the city council. And you'll be sitting in the budget committee advising the urban renewal authority, the district board. The members of the urban renewal board are the same as the members of the city council. But nonetheless, those are two different agencies and require different actions. And we'll talk a little more about urban renewal later in this presentation. So let me talk about a couple things that haven't been probably, these are things that I've added into the PowerPoint presentation. What is uniquely Oregon? And that is are pretty much constraints on how we do business. I typically talk about budgeting in Oregon as sort of a three-legged stool with two legs missing and one clipped in half. So the big revenue streams that you have in budgeting in the public sector in states and local governments are typically income tax, sales tax, and property tax. Income tax is reserved primarily to the state. There's some hybrid income taxes in a few places like Portland, City of Eugene. They have things, employer taxes and some of their own income taxes. By and large, it's not a very common way of raising revenue in the cities. So it's really pretty much off the table. Sales tax is a third rail in Oregon. We don't even go there. I mean, I think there's Yachats, I think has a small sales tax. Ashland has a small sales tax, and I think that's it for the state. I don't think anybody else has dared go down that road. It's pretty, it gets quite the reaction, in the typical Oregonian. So that leaves property tax. So let's talk about property tax. Property tax is based on the value of property, and we'll dive into that a little bit. What has made Oregon's property tax unique? So in 1990, state passed Measure 5, and I've lost my power again to my thingy.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So thank you. Measure 5 did several things. First and foremost, what it did was set a property tax cap, a rate cap. And so that rate cap is $15 in total. $10 is reserved to general units of government, such as cities, counties, fire districts, cemetery districts, various forms of special districts that are considered general units of government. The other $5 per thousand that makes up the total of $15 is with education. So the school, Lane, whoever the community colleges, universities, those have reserved to them $5 per thousand of property tax pursuant to Measure 5 that was passed in 1990. Note that was based on real market value. So that's changed, but we'll get there. Well, yeah, there we go. So one other thing that happened in the 1990 Measure 5 was the notion of compression. Compression is a property by property calculation. Property tax there is a rate. If that rate results, the combined rate of the city, the fire district, the cemetery district, the county exceed $10 per thousand based on using the 1990 valuation method, compression would kick in and everybody would be shrunk back a little bit in what they could expect in proceeds. And again, that's property by property, because some people may be inside a school district, some people may not be inside a school district, some people may be in a fire district, some not. So some properties may be in compression, some properties may not be in compression, but they're in compression if the total of their property taxes at the time exceeded $10 per thousand for general government purposes, excluding debt. And then finally, debt was the one exemption to that. It had to be voter approved debt. General obligation bond is the typical example of a voter approved debt. Back in May of 2024 here, the city members of the community voted to approve a measure to produce debt for the water tank, the Haman's water tank facility. So that project is in process. So that was Measure 5 in 1990. In 1997, Measure 50 was passed as sort of and wasn't here for all this. I came in 2002. But Measure 50 was passed because there was a feeling the need to tweak what had been done in 1990. So among the tweaks was the creation of an assessed value system that up until 1997, assessed value did not exist as a measure of property value. Assessed value is something, it is separate from property, real market value. And it became the basis from which property tax was levied. And that occurred in 1997. The means in which that was done was by taking the real market value as it existed in 1995 to 1996 for everybody's property, reduce that value by 10% and declare that that would be the assessed value. And so that was the basis from which everything moved forward. For reference, Toledo's property tax rate is $5.18 per $1,000 of assessed value. It's not particularly low, not particularly high. It's probably fairly median by way of what property tax rates are. That's a permanent rate that can't be changed ever. There were communities that were caught totally without property tax rates at all. Tangent, Oregon is one. There's a number of them that have no property tax rates to begin with. And so they try awfully hard to figure out how they're going to function as governments. They come up with a lot of creative strategies. So we were in the fortunate position of having a rate in place, and that became our permanent rate as of that time. The assessed value, which is the basis from which the property tax rate is measured, it's only allowed to increase by 3% per year. So if you look at your assessed values on your personal property tax statements, you'll find that year in, year out, the maximum of that is going to increase is 3%. It may not increase 3%, but that's the maximum it's going to increase. So for cities for all governments, what that causes is sort of a maximum for our primary source of revenue for our general fund services, 3% a year in growth. That if for those of you who do personal budgets, city budgets, are heavily impacted by costs of living. They're heavily impacted by changes in costs of benefit packages. The health insurance is not limited to 3%. I don't know of any health insurance that over the course of years has been limited to anywhere near 3%. Our retirement systems, PERS, again, routinely exceeds the 3% per year bump in terms of impact on the cities. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Dodson.
Mr. Dodson, I'm David White. I'm the city manager. And I'm doing the presentation up here on the.
Okay.
So the handout that you have, you can go back and look at it. It's everything that I'm showing here.
You have a stack of the handouts? Oh,
Yeah.
isn't, I'm saying not the same.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're on the desk. They're on the table over there. We're going to shuffleboard. So I'm just talking about property tax at the moment. So again, assessed value is limited to 3% a year. Our costs.
I'm coming up closer because I'm getting ready is.
Okay. Our costs definitely grow at more than 3% a year on any given year. And so the only relief we get from that is new construction. If any new construction is also added into that 3% a year growth. So for property tax, for Toledo, a little bit, unfortunately, Toledo doesn't get much growth. It doesn't have much place to grow. And so the property tax changes in this city are pretty well limited to what the assessed value changes for the existing base. So we are all in the state, all cities in the state are heavily reliant on growth or just about all cities, if you have any kind of property tax, are heavily reliant on growth to basically find a way to balance our budgets. If you have, and this is in your packets, what you're taking home, there's a place where I got a lot of this information. It's on the League of Oregon Cities. That's what LOC is. Frequently asked questions for measures 5 and 50. So just if you want to look and get a little more deeper dive into the issues surrounding measures 5 and 50, you can see that. Moving on.
Okay,
Question?
I'm ignorant here,
Yes, sir.
first time. And so what are measures 5 and 50?
So measure 5 was, they're both property tax measures. Measure 5 was passed in 1990. It set a permanent property tax rate. Or it adopted permanent limits for city governments, county governments, school districts on how much property tax could be levied together cumulatively. So all local governments, cities, school districts, cities, counties, fire districts collectively can only have $10 per thousand. That's the limit. All school forms of work, all school organizations, the school district, the community college, the university, those all can have $5 per thousand collectively. Together, that's $15 per thousand is the maximum that could be levied for property tax, except for voter approved bond measures. If you like here, the water tank was approved last year. So that's the exception to the limit, the one and only exception to the limit. Does that help answer your question? 1997 was measure 50. Measure 50 changed it from $5 per thousand of real market value to $5 per thousand of assessed value. Assessed value was 10%, a little more than 10% less typically of real market value. So it shrunk the amount of real estate taxes that virtually everybody was collecting. Put everybody pretty much in a hole. And that became the new starting point in 1997 based on assessed value. At that point, there was a limit of 3% growth in assessed value every year. So that was the maximum that could be allowed, except for new construction. And so every year, the most the city can collect additional property tax for its general fund, its police, its fire, its library, those and the parks was 3% more than the prior year. Unfortunately, for most of us, it costs more than 3% a year to just provide the same service. Insurance goes up, retirement goes up, everything goes up, and it all goes up faster than 3%. Wages go up. It's just, so it puts government in a continuous hole. Local government. Did that help you?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So up here, let me just moving along. So this is diving a little bit into the mechanics of how our budget works. Budget is prepared by fund. If you're used to any kind of larger business operations that might have subsidiary businesses, that would be maybe the analog to that. Having independent agencies are very independent businesses are like independent funds. Collectively, they become the city. So there's different kinds of funds. Each fund is self-balancing. Each fund has to serve, a particular purpose. And we'll walk through the types of funds that we work with in government. You won't need to remember any of this, and there won't be a test. So you're good to go.
Okay.
So the main fund, there's 4 fund types up here. There'll be 4 more on the next page. But the main one you'll see up here is the general fund. General fund for us is the fund, again, that provides the typical governmental services of parks. If we had our own museum, it would be museums. When we have recreation or police or fire, most of the cost of administration happens here. We carry a lot of our insurance here. Some of those costs may get charged out to other funds, but this is where it all starts. So if and the biggest source of income to these funds, to the general fund, is the property tax. It is not unusual. I'm not quite sure. I haven't gone back and looked at our budget as of yet, but typically in cities, the police department alone, to run a police department all by itself, usually takes more than the total of all the property tax you receive. That may or may not be the case here. Again, I haven't checked, but that is the norm. So everything else has to be made up from other forms of income, franchise fees, other things that we'll kind of walk through. So it's a tricky effort to, make these things work. We have a special revenue fund. So those are for special services that are based on the revenues that we collect. So they're, by way of an example, might be a trail fund. The city has a trail fund that is a part of the gas tax. We get 10% of all the gas tax that the city gets back from the state and the federal government has to go towards a trail development or sidewalk improvements like. So it's not a lot, but it mounts up over the course of years. And so that's a special revenue fund. I think our street fund, Judy, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think our street fund is treated as a special revenue fund as well, because it's largely dependent on franchise fees and gas tax. Do you want to chime in, Judy?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Another capital project fund. So let's see. So let's think about how with this bond issue that we just issued. It's going to, because of that bond issue that we're about to sell, we're going to build a water tank. So that's going to create two funds. We're going to create a debt service fund, which is right next is the other fund on this page, and a capital project fund. The capital project fund, all the money from the sale of the bond will go into that capital project fund, and those proceeds will be used to build the water tank. The debt service fund is basically the mortgage. The bond is equivalent to a mortgage. We borrow money by selling bonds. It's like going to a bank, borrowing money to buy a house. Same thing as a mortgage is the same thing as a bond is for that thing. So every year we have a debt service requirement. We have to make a payment and into that fund, which is collected by that fund with all the property taxes collected every year for that bond. And then the bond holders, the people who bought that debt, equivalent to a bank, will be are paid off with those proceeds. So that's what a debt service fund is for. We have internal service funds. We don't have one of those, to my knowledge, so I won't spend any time on that. Enterprise funds, that is another, those are probably the biggest funds we have. They are business funds. They're called enterprise funds for that very purpose because they're treated as if they were business enterprises. So for us, that's water and sewer. I believe those are the only two that we have. And then there's subsidiary funds within those. There's a distribution system funds within the water and treatment. Same with sewer. Sewer has distribution and collection. And I think there may be some projects or capital project funds in these. There's a list coming up. We can dive into it. But each one of those enterprise funds is a unique operation. So the water fund is there to provide water services. We collect water rates for that purpose to offset those costs. And that all goes in and out of the enterprise fund. And that's kept separate from all the other funds. Same with the sewer fund. Back up here below to your left is a trust and agency fund. I think we have some smaller ones. Judy, you want to chime in and tell me what those are, or we can find out on the next slide or two?
Mainly the grants fund is a trust and agency fund.
Well, I think we talked about another one today, the monies that I think we collect on behalf of the Salvation Army. Is that going to separate fund, or is that just a line item within general fund?
That's a line item within the water fund.
Okay, but that could be an example of a trust relationship. We collect.
Yes.
We collect and disperse on behalf of the public to another agency to do good works on our behalf. We don't keep any of it. We don't charge for it. It's just acting as a trustor of those funds. And then there's reserve funds. The city has a fair number of those that they use for various purposes. And we'll walk through those as we go through the budget process. So here, this is just for your information. Again, you won't be tested, but this is just to relate back our numbering system. to our, when you actually see the budget, you'll see those numbers. You'll have this, you can use this as a sort of a cheat sheet when you get a copy of the budget. To the extent, but it's not important. It's just knowing that our accounting system sets, has numbers for funds, numbers, it has unique sets of numbers for various categories, whether it's a revenue, whether it's expenditure, whether it's, personnel costs, materials costs, et cetera. Everything has a grouping of numbers that are translatable to, their purpose. And everything you see in the budget, it will have ultimately its own unique number, but the numbering system follows a system. So what do you see in a typical budget? Well, you see if on the revenue side, in a typical fund within a budget, you'll see beginning fund balance. That's the bank account you start with. You'll see interest that might be, projected interest that we think, that has been earned in the past, and interest that we project we will earn in the future on the cash that we are holding in various accounts. We hold, at any given time, we're probably holding something well in excess of $1 million in the local government investment pool. It's a pool of funds that the state manages on behalf of all cities and other governmental forms to maximize the investments that these governments can have, at the same time absolutely minimizing risk to comply with the law. So we do fairly well, given that it's almost zero risk in terms of the investment. Delinquent taxes is another. If it's a general fund and it collects property tax, delinquent taxes is typically an item you'll see as one of the revenue streams. Grants is another. We get various grants for various purposes. These days it's going to be largely from the state. In the past, it's probably been a little more fed and state. That will change to mostly state at this point in time, or other sources. Transfers in between funds, that's not unusual. When we get to those, you'll see their intended purpose. Miscellaneous revenues, and then the current year taxes. And again, that's the assumption that you're dealing with a fund that has taxes associated with it. If this were a water fund, it would be fees instead of taxes. That would be the primary resource. Did you have a question? You were. Feel free to ask anytime, interrupt me. I'm on autopilot at this time, but. So the other side of the equation is expenditures. And so these, the goal is, the requirement is to balance. And unlike our uncle in Washington, D.C., we do balance our budgets because we have to by law. And so at the end of the day, everything, the total of all resources matches up to the total of all outlays. So in the case of expenditures, we have typically you will find, and this is again, we're looking largely at what a general fund would be. Personal services, that's all salaries, benefits, taxes, personal taxes, payroll taxes that we pay out, that the city pays out, not that the employees pay out. Then a grouping of accounts that are materials and services, that would be the lights, contract services for cleaning things, janitorial. It would be our legal services, any kind of contract services we have. It would be the purchase of supplies, any kind of goods or equipment, on and on. There's a lot of items that are categorized as materials and services. Capital outlay for the city of Toledo, capital outlay is something that has a minimum value of $10,000 and will survive at least a year in service. Debt service is payment against debt. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So if we issue debt, whether it's general obligation debt, those are property tax based debts. There's other ways we can issue debt or just borrow money. And so debt service is payment against those debts. So there's revenue bonds, there's full faith and credit bonds, there's bank loans, there's state loans, there's various ways of being in debt. And then the flip side of transfers in on revenues is transfers out on expenditures. Finally, there are the two accounts. There's contingency. Contingency is where we like to put is whatever is left over, so it's available for use if needed. during the year. It still takes a council action to move it from contingency to an expenditure account, but at least it's available. Anything that doesn't fall in contingency or any of the expenditure accounts ends up in the ending fund balance. And that can't, except for a very complicated process of a supplemental appropriation, that money can't be touched, and that will reside and stay within the budget through year end. So that's the basic layout of a budget. You'll see a little bit more, you'll see more on this presentation about what that looks like on an actual budget worksheet. And here we are. So if you look up there, this is not a current year budget. This one's a little dated. So don't worry about the numbers and don't, but the columns at the top are what I want to point you at, and then rows looking at going down the middle. So the columns at the top are essentially what's required of every single government agency in the state. With one addition that the city of Toledo puts in, which I think is a good addition. And that is the adopted, where am I looking? The column that says the adopted amount on the third column on the left. Otherwise, the columns that are required are the 2 prior year actuals. That information comes from our annual audits. Typically, some cities don't quite have that information readily available, so they do their best efforts to get it, to get those actual numbers. We do have those numbers, so we rely on the audits to produce that information. Then we put in the adopted budget from the current fiscal year, which will be the prior year, next year. That was probably confusing. I probably didn't need to say that. Anyway, that's the current year's adopted budget, which is the budget that the council adopted in June of 2024. The column to the right of that is a column that really is more important to us, which is what do we actually expect to be either raised, because this is the revenue side of the picture, or on the next page, what do we think will start being spent? Its columns are the same, but in this case, it's the spending of those accounts. And if you look over towards the next column over after the 4 columns there, you'll see the account numbers. That relates back to what I showed you earlier. Next to those are the various line items. That tells you, breaks it down quite a bit, and we ask the departments do that. We're not gonna have you focus too much on the line items, because we want you focused, staying at a little bit higher level on the budget. And then to the right, you will see some more information that is, and I think that FTE information is no longer in the budget. Is that right, Judy? I think that's pulled from this section of the budget and put in a summary table.
No, it will be in this year's budget as well. It's just that we've added more things together under salaries than listing them as individuals.
That's what I was gonna ask, was I think last year there was an effort by Brian and Amanda to try to simplify the presentation a little bit and whittle things down to wages or salaries and some other kind of categorical.
For budget committee consideration.
Yeah,
Which makes sense. I mean.
and then having it somewhere else in the documentation, kind of the spelling out of all positions.
Yeah, so to the extent that you want to find it, you can find it, but truly what we want you to focus on is the big picture, whether the purpose of the budget is being met in your mind.
Yeah.
So off to the right are 3 columns. The first column in the case of this budget is the proposed column. That was the budget officer's proposed budget. That's the only column that will be filled in on the right-hand side of the page when you get your budget from us. The next 2 columns are the second column is the one that you'll be working on, which is the approved budget. That is what the budget committee's job is to go back through and decide what they want to do with respect to what has been proposed. Want to take a minute and come back?
It's not new to him. It's nothing new for him, so.
Okay, we'll move on. And then the final column is the what the city council will be asked to fill in. Again, that is limited by virtue of whatever you do in the adopted portion of the budget. So they don't have much maneuverability after that. So this particular page is just part of the expenditure budget. This has this has what is the personnel services in this case. There was a lot there. The next page will pick up the materials and services. the capital outlay, the transfers out, and contingency at the end, and then at the very bottom, you will see the fund balances, because this is a separate fund. So not every budget page that you see will look like this. This one's an entire fund that was the street fund. When you see the general fund, you'll see departmental budgets, but it won't have any amounts. They'll just have expenditures, not even revenues. The revenues will be summarized in the general fund. Question, you're turning around. Sir, Mr. Dodson, did you have a? Okay. So I'm gonna move, and this is. Okay, more of the same. So this should be the end of the street. This is the street reserve. So this is just showing that there's two departments within the street fund. And street reserve is one of the two departments. One is the operating budget, one's the street reserve fund. So that was, again, this is an older budget. This is not what you'll see. So I want to talk about something a little different in this budget, because you will also be acting as the advisory committee of the budget committee for the urban renewal district. So what is the urban renewal district? Well, the urban renewal district is a geographic area that has a separate agency. That separate agency is the Urban Renewal Authority, the Urban Renewal Agency, Urban Renewal URA. So that is the governing body for the district. Well, that governing body is, in the case of Toledo and generally in most cities, is the city council. They wear two hats, but they have to have different meetings because it is a different agency altogether. It has its own distinct geographical boundaries. The urban renewal district does, and by state law, there's a limitation for agencies of cities this size that it can be no more than 25%. That the district boundaries can not comprise more than 25% of the city's. The city's jurisdiction, city limits. No more than 25% of the city limits can be within the urban renewal district, and no more than 25% of the assessed value of the city can be within the district. So we fall within both those. There's some room for growth here. We fall within both those limitations. Our urban renewal district. It is, as I mentioned, a separate budget. That is a separate agency with separate boundaries, and it has a separate budget. And they have all the same rules of compliance and construction applied to that budget as due to the city's regular budget. The urban renewal district is funded in quite a little bit different way. So let's talk about urban renewal just a little bit. Urban renewal is largely based on the notion of tax increment financing. So when an urban renewal district is created, what happens within the district is all the properties at the time of the creation of the district, the base value of those properties are frozen for purposes of taxation for all the tax districts around the area. That anybody that taxes in the urban renewal district before will continue to receive the tax revenue that they received before. And I believe the law has changed to give them a slight 3% bump in that tax revenue every year. That for properties that are in the district. Everything that is any new construction that incurs in the district after the creation of the district, 100% of that property tax goes to the urban renewal agency. So the city goes to the urban renewal district. So normally when there's new construction, all that money gets the $15 per thousand total of property tax revenue. It goes to the school district, to the county, to the city, to the fire districts and so on. They continue to get those taxes on the base amount. But they don't get any of the money on the new construction. And that's the point of urban renewal. All that new money goes into the urban renewal district for the purpose of enhancing the urban renewal district, to create jobs, to create economic growth, to invest in that area by putting in infrastructure, buying properties, selling properties, basically to create economic activity. So that's the whole point of an urban renewal district. So we have one in the city here. So one more bullet point, and those revenues, that TIF revenues, tax instrument finance, go through the life continue the life of the urban renewal district, because those districts eventually go away. And when they go away, all the new value that has been created all of a sudden is taxed and distributed to all those other people that were receiving, that had their base frozen before. So they'll get everybody else, including the city, will get a surge of revenues when the district has finished its work. That's typically 20 to 25 years. That's how long those districts are constructed. And that's the reason for that is frequently an urban rural district will borrow money, issue bonds. Bonds take, are 15, 20, 25-year lives. So you have to pay those off, and you have to have dedicated revenue to pay it off, and the district provides the revenue. So I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but that's how those work.
How old is our urban renewal district? How old is our urban renewal
It's
district?
only about 2 years old, and we don't have any debt as yet, so we may yet, who knows, we may yet issue debt. It's doing fairly well. The district got very fortunate in the beginning because it immediately got a flush of funds from the Juno project off from GP that probably was not anticipated to go into the district at the beginning. So that was it. And the city got pretty fortunate, very lucky indeed. So that's a pretty good slug of money that comes into the district right off the bat. More on our renewal. So as I just mentioned, at the end of the lifespan, the tax bases are jump up to their new value for the purposes of all the governments surrounding. And they all start collecting all that new tax revenue, and the district no longer is collecting. For the taxpayer, it doesn't make any difference. Their tax rates remain the same, their tax bill remains the same the whole time. The only question is what happens to their tax dollars. Their tax dollars, instead of going to all the different agencies, start going to just the urban renewal district, except for a small amount that they had in the beginning. So that's a little bit tricky, but it's an incredibly valuable instrument for making cities work. We talked a little bit about this. With this, the urban renewal districts are required to put together urban renewal plans that describe their projects they're going to finance. Those are adopted in a complicated adoption process. They can be modified by the councils. It takes a while. There are the hearings and whatnot. So you try to get everything into your urban renewal district at the outset that you can imagine you need. You try to cover all geographic areas that you think may experience growth or need project work. You're looking for two things when you're creating a district by and large. One, future large taxpayers, and the future necessary infrastructure that serves the overall purpose of the district. Projects can be done pay as you go, as they are right now with the city of Toledo, or they can be done debt financing. So you can issue bonds against the revenue stream that you have. That's largely how that urban renewal pays for things. It can sell property, it can take in grants, it can receive other, donations as well. But the biggest source of money that goes into urban renewal is in fact the tax increment financing. Just as a side note, the city is capable of charging some of its administrative costs for work that's actually done on behalf of the urban renewal district that's not done on behalf of the city government. So if half of my time is spent administering the urban renewal district and half my time is spent on city government, 50% of my salary could be charged off against the district. Not required, but it could be. You've suffered enough. Questions on
I don't have a question on the training, but I do have a question about the next meetings. So is there a city council meeting on May 14th?
no. May 7th and May 21st.
Oh, it's May 7th. Oh, sorry. I thought they were closer together.
May 7th.
The second.
Maybe I just put them in wrong on my work calendar. Okay.
The second Tuesday is usually the planning commission. I think we're overlapping with them, so I'm not sure we figured that one out yet. We will figure that out.
We're gonna do the special session for the city manager recruitment process, weren't we? The 14th. I think we were gonna try to do it that week, but I think we're gonna try to do it on a different day
I think,
than
I
Wednesday.
think that's right. I have to go back and look at that calendar. It's not all about
I was at
Yeah,
city manager
recruitment.
recruitment.
Yeah. So
And
there's,
sorry I was late. I didn't know that we had a meeting. Somehow
Yeah, I sent you an email this morning.
this morning.
Yeah.
That means I probably see it next week.
well, I think you sent you a reminder this morning, right?
Sorry.
Because you sent out the actual notice earlier.
We just appointed you yesterday, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was
Congratulations,
wondering
by
about
the way.
that because I applied and nobody said anything. Thought, oh, well.
So the next budget committee meeting is May 13th,
Is that right?
Yes.
and the second budget committee meeting is May 15th. So we're expected to have reviewed the budget between the 13th and the 15th. Is that correct?
Judy, if you can, yeah,
Sorry that that's so compressed, but that's, David and I were just hired in March, so we haven't had as much time as we usually would have to prepare a budget, and so it's kind of gotten crunched together here. Sorry. I apologize for that, but that's the best we could do.
so
And we do have the ability to have an additional meeting on the 20th if necessary.
and if you want even further meetings, it's up to you. I mean, we're trying to help you, but Judy's correct. We got started late in this process.
And I appreciate that. I think just also knowing that the public only has the ability to request the budget and review it in those 2 days. I'm not gonna push on it right now. I just anticipate that I probably won't be the only one concerned about the tight turnaround.
I missed that last part.
I said, because the public only has that 2-day window to get their copy and review it if they're so invested. But I'll be surprised if I'm the only one concerned about the tight
I'm
turnaround.
sure you probably won't be. We will do our best to, will we be able to post that budget right away when we distribute it to the council, to the budget committee, Judy?
Yes, definitely.
So it'll be online, so people can at least dive into their computers. And again,
We had a bit more cushion last year, but we didn't have much better cushion than we did last year. And I remember this same concern did come up of how quick that was going to go, where we kind of anticipated that we might have to have that extra session, and then we didn't end up needing it. I think we ended up just kind of barreling through and doing a pretty long second meeting. But yeah,
I will add.
I feel like we had a week last year. Yeah.
You probably did. I will add a couple of things. I mean, Judy's absolutely right. We, you know, both she and I were hired very late. There, you know, obviously there's been a lot of turnover here and we're doing our best to get caught up. But the other thing is there's a whole nother bite of the apple when it comes to the council. I mean, the budget will be presented to the council in June. So people that are interested, you know, who didn't feel they had enough time to come before the budget committee and make their concerns and their voice heard, we'll have a public hearing in June, I can't remember when. 18th, right, so June 18th, so more than a month later, they could come to the council. And any issues they want to raise at that point in time, they can also do that, and then they have the whole time in between, because we're not hard to find.
Okay, can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
How does the budget committee operate? Do we have a leader?
You will at your next meeting. You'll appoint somebody from your group as the presiding
How
officer,
many people are on the committee?
14 altogether.
14?
14, seven residents, 7 counselors.
Are we full now? Do we have?
Two vacancies.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Make that
we're at 12. So
Yeah.
it's 7 counselors and 5 community members.
Okay, so you have 14 seats, 12 occupied.
The trick is to move that someone else lead before you get nominated.
Find a way.
Did you have other questions about that?
No, that's okay. I'm familiar with budgeting, but I've got to learn something more about how this works in the city.
It's still a little different.
Because it's not a business.
Part of it is, but, and I try to actually, thank you for saying that, because frankly, I think it is a business, and I think it's the second largest business in the city. It's next to general, after GP. We have,
Business, you don't have public.
oh, it's a very hard business to run, because you have to be transparent in a way that businesses don't have to be transparent. Their board meetings aren't typically open, ours are, unless they're a public corporation. We're bound by many rules, but at the end of the day, it still has it is a going concern, and it has to survive for 50, 100 years longer. Businesses typically think in quarterly financial reports. We think in multi-year financial reports. We have to buy, for instance, water. We have to buy water rights that are going to be durable for 50 to 100 years worth of change in our population. No business has to worry about a 50 to 100-year investment on day one. If they're looking 3 to 5 years in advance, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I always like the opportunity to lecture.
You missed your calling?
Well, actually, I did teach a class for him.
Is there anything?
You can lecture when nobody listens.
Judy, is there anything kind of any curveballs that we should be kind of prepared for? Anything that, as we look into this budget year, that we might really want to be like spending a little extra time on?
Well, I think it's gonna look pretty much like it did last year. Of course, the numbers change and move around, but the format, we're keeping very much the same, not trying to trick anybody or surprise anybody with anything. So I think it'll be pretty much business as usual.
We're going to hear that, just like the council heard yesterday, the water fund and the general fund are going to be very tight. We're working awfully hard to get those, in the black. And not an easy job.
The thing they pointed out yesterday, because I didn't want to chime in, but chemical costs have gone up too.
Yeah,
That's been a driving force also.
Yeah, everything goes up rapidly.
That was
This committee is
the budget
concerned.
game that I made up.
As far as this committee is concerned, what's the legal issues?
Well done.
I mean, does the committee have authority to make decisions?
You're required to.
Yeah.
You're required to make decisions as a committee.
That I mean,
That's the law.
authority that makes decisions that mean something.
Well, as I started this meeting, yours is probably the most open authority to affect the budget, the Citizens Budget Committee. Our budget, the budget officer's budget is the first step in the process, and it's proposed, but it really carries no weight because you can change it entirely. But once you adopt the budget, once you approve the budget, you approve a budget as a budget committee, the city council really doesn't have much room to vary that budget. They can move it, and again, Judy, chime in if I'm wrong, but I think 10% is the max that the
Yes.
city council can change your budget. So what you do is the most meaningful step in the process. Because it has the most weight to the outcome. So that was the legislature, when they created the budget laws, were very conscious that this is the community's budget. This is the citizens' budget. And that, it's not just the city council's budget, but it's the community's.
So, for the sake of argument too, I think one thing that I think about a lot, and boy, I wish we had, somebody who ran a news outlet in this community on the call to hear this, but, I think, in some way, the fact that we've struggled to get community members to join the budget committee, and we've always had a couple of vacancies, does create some limitations of the community representatives' power in these meetings. When you have 14 positions and only 12 of them are filled, that means that 7 of those seats are city council, so they can overwhelm the vote. And I'm just saying, for the sake of, rhetoric here, this is, just
Sure.
just for the sake of argument. The worst that the council can do, right? So let's say the budget committee comes up with a budget that is really aggressive, whatever. Council wants to be more conservative. Council could reject it, send it back to the budget, but that's not likely going to happen because we're all sitting at the table together. Council and community members are sitting at the table together, proposing this budget or sending this budget to council for approval and adoption. Yeah, worst that happens is they kick it back. Something has changed between, the approval of it by the budget committee and June 18th when it gets presented and suddenly it's getting sent back. One of the downsides, as I said, is when we only have 5 community members. Barry, get that word out there. When we only have Trib. When we only have 5 community members, it does mean that there is a lopsided power given to the council. That if the council does really want something, the committee isn't there the community volunteers who are on this committee don't have the power to push back as evenly. So, I think to your point of how much kind of power happens here, I think you don't really have to worry about it. In my experience of last year being a community volunteer on this committee and now being a city councilor, I do think we all work really well together. I think there's overwhelming consensus when we do have, our open discussion. I don't think we've had a single close vote on anything budget related. So I think we tend to come to consensus really, really well, but I will use this little moment for the cameras and all of that stuff to say, we could use 2 more people. We could use 2 more people from the community that create that extra balance.
And if people have concerns or they want to make a difference, they need to get involved. That's the bottom line. We need more involvement from the community.
It's not the most exciting, but here we are.
I know, I thought that was a good pleasure.
Price of admission.
That,
It's it. Unless you have more questions, yeah.
You got here.
Well,
for the
thank you,
good part of
David.
that.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks,
Appreciate you
Judy.
guys.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Barry. Thanks, Trim.
I'll see what I can do about an article.
You have 1 hour.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.
No AI.
you're welcome. Who was it talked me into this?
Get your arm twisted.
I asked that same question every